The morning cold bit deep into every surface at Camp McCoy that March day in 1945. Frost had settled thick on the wire barriers surrounding the compound. Each exhale created small puffs of vapor in the bitter Wisconsin air. Across the frozen ground, a Japanese sergeant made his way toward the mess hall. His footsteps crunched on the hard earth. 3 months had passed since his capture on that volcanic island. 3 months of accepting the disgrace of surviving when death should have claimed him. Hiroshi Nakamura had learned to live with shame. American captivity brought uncertainties he couldn't have imagined. Each day blended into the next behind the wire. Hope had died somewhere between the battlefield and this place. The mess hall loomed ahead. Steam rose from its chimneys. The promise of warm food drew him forward through the cutting wind. His breath came in short clouds as he approached the building. Then came the voice, clear and unmistakable. "Ohayo gozaimasu Nakamura-san, Kyowa samui desu ne." Perfect Japanese, flawless pronunciation. The formal greeting carried every nuance of proper respect. "Good morning, Mr. Nakamura. Cold today, isn't it?" Nakamura's feet stopped moving. His eyes went wide with shock. The world seemed to tilt around him. This couldn't be real. The voice belonged to an American guard. Young, maybe 20 years old. Fair-skinned, definitely American. But the words that came from his mouth were pure Japanese. Not broken phrases learned from a book. Not crude attempts at communication. Perfect, fluent, native-level Japanese. The grammar was flawless. The politeness level exactly right for the situation. The accent carried no foreign trace. This American spoke Japanese better than some Japanese soldiers Nakamura had known. For a moment, madness seemed possible. Perhaps captivity had finally broken his mind. Perhaps isolation and shame had driven him to hallucinations. How else could he explain this impossible encounter? But the cold was real. The frost was real. The guard standing before him was real. And the perfect Japanese words hung in the frigid air like visible proof of something that shouldn't exist. This story begins with that moment of shock, but it stretches far beyond one prisoner's disbelief. It reaches into the complex heart of wartime America. It reveals secrets about loyalty and identity that few understood at the time. The tale of Japanese prisoners meeting Japanese-speaking American guards represents something extraordinary, something that challenges everything we think we know about World War II. It's about language as both weapon and bridge, about identity and belonging in the midst of global conflict. To understand how this impossible encounter became possible, we must go back to the beginning, to the moment when everything changed for Japanese Americans. December 7, 1941, altered the lives of 127,000 people forever. They lived ordinary American lives on the morning Pearl Harbor was attacked. By evening, they had become objects of suspicion and fear. 2/3 held American citizenship. They were born on American soil. They attended American schools. They worked American jobs. They considered themselves Americans in every way that mattered. The other third were immigrants, first-generation arrivals from Japan. Laws had prevented them from becoming citizens. Discriminatory policies kept them as permanent outsiders. But they had built lives here, raised families here, put down roots in American soil. Pearl Harbor transformed them all overnight. Neighbors became potential enemies. Fellow citizens became security threats. Friends became strangers across an unbridgeable divide. Fear swept across America like a storm. Japanese faces became symbols of betrayal. Japanese names became marks of suspicion. Japanese heritage became proof of divided loyalty. The government response was swift and devastating. Executive Order 9066 emerged from President Roosevelt's pen within months. The order authorized something unthinkable: the forced removal of Japanese Americans from their homes, the imprisonment of American citizens behind barbed wire. It was one of the darkest chapters in American civil liberties. Entire families were given days to pack their lives into suitcases. Homes were abandoned, businesses were lost, communities were destroyed. The camps were scattered across America's interior. Desolate places where hope went to die. Guard towers watched over American citizens who had committed no crime except being born with the wrong ancestry. But even as their families disappeared behind wire and watchtowers, something remarkable happened. Thousands of young Japanese American men made a choice that would define their generation. They volunteered for military service. They chose to fight for the country that had imprisoned their families. They walked past the guard towers holding their parents to enlist in America's army. The decision seems impossible to understand. How do you serve a country that doesn't trust you? How do you pledge loyalty to a government that has locked up your family? How do you wear the uniform of a nation that treats you as an enemy? Yet they did it, in numbers that stunned military officials. From the camps themselves came volunteers ready to prove their loyalty through service, ready to bleed for America even as America questioned their devotion. The military's response was confused and contradictory. Some officials saw only potential threats: enemy faces in American uniforms, security risks waiting to happen. Others recognized something different: an opportunity that could change the course of the war. Pearl Harbor had revealed a critical weakness in American military capabilities, a weakness that threatened every operation in the Pacific. America had almost no one who could speak Japanese. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a strategic disaster waiting to happen. Every captured document needed translation. Every intercepted communication required interpretation. Every prisoner interrogation demanded language skills America simply didn't possess. The entire U.S. military had fewer than 12 officers who spoke fluent Japanese. 12 men to support operations across the vast Pacific theater. The number was laughably inadequate for the intelligence operations that victory would require. But the solution was walking through recruitment centers across America. Young Japanese-American men who had learned their parents' language at home. Second-generation Americans who were perfectly bilingual. Citizens who could bridge the language gap that threatened American success. The irony was profound and painful. The same government imprisoning Japanese-American families was simultaneously recruiting their sons for military service. The same officials questioning Japanese-American loyalty were begging for Japanese-American language skills. In November 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor, the Military Intelligence Service Language School opened in San Francisco. Its mission was clear: train military linguists for Pacific operations. Create the language experts America desperately needed. The primary students would be Japanese Americans, young men who had grown up speaking both English and Japanese, citizens who could serve as bridges between two worlds at war. The training was intensive beyond anything most soldiers experienced. Students spent months mastering not just conversational Japanese. They learned military terminology that most Japanese civilians never heard. They studied regional dialects that varied across Japan's islands. They memorized the complex written characters used in official documents. Map reading became an art form. Military communications required perfect comprehension. Interrogation techniques needed cultural sensitivity that would encourage cooperation rather than resistance. Many students came from families torn apart by war and internment. They studied Japanese language while their parents lived behind American barbed wire. They prepared to fight Japan, while their siblings were classified as potential enemies. Staff Sergeant Daniel Inouye later captured the emotional complexity perfectly. His parents were imprisoned as enemy aliens. He was training to fight the country they had left decades earlier. The burden was almost unbearable. Yet they persevered. They excelled. They became some of America's most valuable intelligence assets. Their language skills would help defeat the country of their ancestors. Their cultural knowledge would bridge gaps that pure military force could never cross. Graduation meant assignment to various roles across the Pacific Theater. Some joined combat units as translators. Others worked in intelligence centers analyzing captured documents. Still others received assignments that would create the war's most psychologically complex encounters. They became guards at prisoner-of-war camps, American soldiers who looked Japanese, guards who spoke perfect Japanese, men who would shatter every assumption Japanese prisoners held about their captors. The assignment served multiple strategic purposes. Communication was essential for basic camp administration. Orders needed translation. Rules required explanation. Daily interactions demanded language skills. But deeper strategic considerations drove these assignments. American intelligence officers hoped Japanese-speaking guards might gather information from prisoners who didn't realize their conversations were being understood. Casual talk between prisoners might reveal military secrets. Unguarded comments could expose strategic weaknesses. The psychological impact on Japanese prisoners was immediate and devastating. These soldiers had been taught that Americans were culturally and racially inferior. They believed American society was shallow and materialistic. They assumed American military capabilities were limited by racial divisions. Then they encountered guards who spoke their language fluently, Americans who understood Japanese culture deeply, enemy soldiers who showed respect for Japanese customs and traditions. The experience shattered fundamental assumptions about America and Americans. It forced prisoners to confront the complexity of American society in ways Japanese propaganda had never prepared them for. Private First Class Kenji Yamamoto was captured during the Battle of Saipan. His first encounter with a Japanese-speaking guard left him questioning his sanity. The American soldier spoke Japanese with the accent of Yamamoto's home prefecture. Perfect regional dialect. Flawless cultural knowledge. When the guard asked about his family using perfectly respectful language, Yamamoto nearly collapsed from shock. This couldn't be real. Americans couldn't possess this level of cultural sophistication. Yet here was proof that everything he'd been taught was wrong. The guards faced their own psychological challenges. Many were second-generation Japanese Americans who had grown up between two cultures. Japanese at home, English at school. Now they served as intermediaries between their adopted country and prisoners from their ancestral homeland. Sergeant Robert Kuroda served as a guard at several POW camps. He reflected often on the complexity of his position. The prisoners looked like his uncles and cousins. Some came from villages near where his grandparents had lived. But they were also enemy soldiers who had fought against American forces. Finding the right balance between humanity and duty became one of the most difficult challenges of his life. Too much sympathy could compromise security. Too little humanity could destroy intelligence opportunities. The line was thin and constantly shifting. Despite the barriers of war and captivity, unexpected opportunities for cultural exchange emerged. Conversations between guards and prisoners sometimes revealed shared experiences and common ground. Both groups had been shaped by Japanese culture, though in very different ways. These interactions were carefully monitored by American intelligence officers who recognized their value. Information about Japanese military capabilities, morale, and strategic thinking emerged from conversations that felt natural rather than forced. Prisoners who might have remained silent with non-Japanese interrogators sometimes opened up when speaking with guards who understood their cultural context. Not just their words, but their meanings. Not just their statements, but their implications. The intelligence gathered proved invaluable for American military planning. Details about Japanese defensive preparations emerged through casual conversation. Information about troop movements came from prisoners who felt comfortable speaking their native language. Strategic priorities became clear through discussions that felt more like conversations between countrymen than formal interrogations. But the relationship between guards and prisoners was never simple or one-dimensional. Many guards struggled with the moral complexity of their situation. They felt torn between loyalty to America and sympathy for prisoners who shared their cultural heritage. Some prisoners questioned their own assumptions about American society and the nature of the conflict. The guards represented something they hadn't thought possible. Americans who understood Japan, enemy soldiers who respected Japanese culture, captors who treated prisoners with dignity rather than hatred. The camps themselves varied widely in conditions and administration. All followed Geneva Convention requirements for prisoner treatment. But the presence of Japanese-speaking guards often led to more nuanced and culturally sensitive management practices. Guards who understood Japanese concepts of honor and shame could maintain discipline more effectively than those who relied on force or intimidation. Cultural knowledge became a tool for creating stable, productive camp environments. Daily routines created numerous opportunities for interaction. Mealtimes required communication. Work details needed coordination. Medical appointments demanded translation. Recreational activities involved explanation. The presence of fluent Japanese speakers made these interactions more efficient and less prone to misunderstanding. Some guards found themselves serving as informal cultural interpreters, helping American camp administrators understand Japanese customs and expectations. This cultural knowledge proved valuable for maintaining camp order and preventing conflicts that might arise from misunderstandings. Guards could explain American rules in ways that made sense within Japanese cultural frameworks. They could address prisoner concerns with appropriate respect and sensitivity. Prisoner reactions to Japanese-speaking guards evolved over time. Initial shock and disbelief gave way to curiosity about these Americans who seemed to bridge two worlds. Some prisoners became genuinely interested in learning about Japanese-American experiences. These conversations sometimes led to profound revelations for both sides. Prisoners learned about the diversity of American society and the opportunities it offered immigrants and their children. Guards gained insights into Japanese military culture and the experiences that had shaped their prisoners' worldviews. The psychological impact extended far beyond immediate participants. Word spread through prisoner networks about the existence of Japanese-speaking American guards. Stories circulated about respectful treatment and cultural understanding. These accounts challenged assumptions about American racial attitudes and cultural sophistication. Some prisoners began questioning the propaganda they had received about American society. If Americans could produce soldiers who spoke perfect Japanese, what other assumptions might be wrong? If enemy guards could show cultural respect, what did that say about American values? As 1945 progressed and Japan's military situation became increasingly desperate, conversations took on new dimensions. Prisoners who had expected quick rescue or prisoner exchanges began confronting the possibility of prolonged captivity or even Japanese defeat. Japanese-speaking guards found themselves in unique positions to provide emotional support and cultural understanding to prisoners struggling with these realizations. Their ability to communicate in Japanese allowed for nuanced discussions about honor, duty, and the changing nature of the war. But perhaps the most significant impact was on post-war attitudes and relationships. Japanese prisoners who returned home after the war carried memories of American guards who had treated them with respect and cultural sensitivity. These experiences would influence Japanese perceptions of America during the occupation period and beyond. The stage was set for encounters that would challenge assumptions and bridge cultural divides. The impossible had become routine. American guards speaking perfect Japanese. Enemy soldiers finding common ground with their captors. Cultural understanding emerging from the depths of global conflict. What happened in those camps would demonstrate the complex realities of war and identity in ways that neither side had anticipated. April 20th, 1945 brought thick humidity to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Spring air hung heavy with moisture that made every breath feel substantial. In the camp's makeshift library, two young Japanese men sat across from each other in animated conversation. To any casual observer, they might appear to be old friends catching up. Their discussion flowed naturally. Their body language suggested comfort and familiarity. Their shared laughter indicated genuine connection. But the reality was far more complex than appearances suggested. Corporal Tadashi Yamada wore an American uniform. Born in California, he had grown up fully American, while maintaining strong connections to Japanese culture through his family. When war came and internment began, his parents had been imprisoned in a camp while he chose military service. Private Ichiro Tanaka wore prisoner clothing. Captured on Okinawa during the final desperate battles there, he had fought against American forces with the dedication expected of Japanese soldiers. His brother had died fighting Americans on Iwo Jima. His loyalty to Japan remained unshaken despite his capture. Their conversation, conducted in the intimate familiarity of their shared native language, was about to reveal truths that would challenge everything both men thought they knew about loyalty, identity, and the nature of their conflict. The psychological transformation that occurred when Japanese prisoners encountered Japanese-speaking American guards was profound and multifaceted. For many prisoners, these encounters represented their first real glimpse into the complexity of American society, a complexity that Japanese propaganda had systematically denied or distorted. Sergeant Masawa Tanabe had been captured during the final stages of the Philippines campaign. His first meeting with Corporal James Nakamura, a guard at the Texas camp where he was held, left him completely confused about the nature of reality. Tanabe initially thought the Americans had somehow captured and brainwashed Japanese soldiers to serve as guards. The idea that someone could be both Japanese and American seemed impossible to his understanding of the world. Everything he had been taught suggested these identities were mutually exclusive. This confusion was perfectly understandable, given the context of Japanese wartime education and propaganda. Japanese civilians and soldiers had been taught that racial and cultural identity were fixed and immutable. Being Japanese meant absolute loyalty to the emperor and complete rejection of foreign influences. The concept of dual identity or cultural assimilation was presented as a fundamental betrayal of Japanese values. Mixing cultures was weakness. Adopting foreign customs was treason. Serving foreign interests was the ultimate dishonor. Japanese-speaking American guards represented living contradictions to these teachings. Here were men who looked Japanese and spoke Japanese fluently. They understood Japanese customs and traditions perfectly. They showed appropriate respect for Japanese cultural concepts. Yet they wore American uniforms and served American interests. For prisoners who had been raised on propaganda about American racial hatred and cultural imperialism, These encounters forced a complete reevaluation of their worldview. Nothing they had been taught could explain what they were experiencing. Corporal Nakamura, the guard who had so thoroughly confused Sergeant Watanabe, was himself struggling with the complexities of his position. Born in Los Angeles to immigrant parents, he had grown up fully American, while maintaining strong connections to Japanese culture through his family. When war began and his parents were sent to an internment camp, he faced an agonizing choice between bitterness and service. Anger would have been understandable. Resentment would have been justified. Rebellion would have been natural. Instead, he chose loyalty through service. He chose to prove Japanese-American dedication through military excellence. He chose to demonstrate that cultural heritage and national loyalty could coexist. I could have let anger consume me, Nakamura later reflected. My parents were behind barbed wire while I was being asked to serve the country that had imprisoned them. But I chose to prove our loyalty through service, to show that Japanese Americans were as patriotic as any other Americans. Conversations between guards like Nakamura and prisoners like Watanabe often began with practical matters. Camp rules needed explanation. Meal schedules required communication. Work assignments demanded coordination. But these exchanges frequently evolved into deeper discussions about identity, loyalty, and the nature of the conflict. Guards and prisoners found themselves exploring questions that went far beyond immediate practical concerns. These conversations were monitored by American intelligence officers who recognized their strategic value, but they also served humanitarian purposes, providing both sides with opportunities to process the psychological complexities of their situation. The intelligence value of these conversations was significant and multifaceted. Japanese prisoners, speaking in their native language with guards who understood cultural nuances, often revealed information they would never have shared with non-Japanese interrogators. Details about military units emerged naturally in casual conversation. Information about defensive preparations came out through seemingly innocent discussions. Insights about troop morale surfaced when prisoners felt comfortable expressing themselves freely. Staff Sergeant Richard Hayashi served as both guard and interpreter at multiple POW camps. He developed sophisticated techniques for gathering intelligence through seemingly casual conversation. The approach required patience, cultural sensitivity, and genuine human connection. The key was to make them feel comfortable, he explained. When prisoners realized I understood not just their words, but their cultural context, they often opened up about things they would never tell a regular interrogator. But information flow wasn't unidirectional. Guards also learned valuable insights about Japanese military culture, strategic thinking, and the psychological state of enemy forces. These insights proved valuable for American military planners developing strategies for the final assault on Japan. Cultural exchanges that occurred in these camps had implications extending far beyond immediate military intelligence. Many Japanese prisoners encountered for the first time detailed accounts of life in America and the experiences of Japanese immigrants and their children. These stories challenged propaganda narratives about American society and provided alternative perspectives on the relationship between East and West. Prisoners learned that America was more complex, more diverse, and more accepting than they had been taught. Private Hiroshi Sato had been captured on Luzon during the Philippines campaign. He was particularly affected by conversations with Sergeant Tom Ogawa, a guard whose father had immigrated from the same prefecture in Japan as Sato's grandfather. The connection went beyond shared geography. Their families had similar stories of immigration and adaptation. Their grandparents had faced similar challenges in adjusting to American life. Their cultural backgrounds provided common ground that transcended their current circumstances. Ogawa-san told me stories about his father's life in America. The struggles, but also the opportunities, Sato later recalled. It was the first time I understood that Japanese people could succeed in America while maintaining their cultural identity. These personal connections often transcended the formal boundaries of the guard-prisoner relationship. While military regulations prohibited fraternization, shared language and cultural understanding created bonds that were difficult to ignore. Some guards found themselves genuinely concerned about the welfare of specific prisoners. Some prisoners developed respect for guards who treated them with dignity and cultural sensitivity. The relationships remained professional, but they carried emotional weight that affected both sides. The psychological impact on guards themselves was equally complex. Many had enlisted or been drafted, while their own families were imprisoned in internment camps. The irony was painful and difficult to reconcile. Serving as guards for enemy prisoners, while their parents and siblings were also behind barbed wire, created emotional conflicts that few could fully resolve. They were proving loyalty to a country that questioned their family's loyalty. They were demonstrating patriotism while their relatives were treated as potential enemies. Sergeant Daniel Inouye, who later became a U.S. Senator and Medal of Honor recipient, described the psychological burden with characteristic understatement. We were proving our loyalty by guarding the enemies of America, while America was imprisoning our families as potential enemies. The contradiction was almost unbearable. But we persevered because we believed in the principles America represented, even when America didn't always live up to those principles. Conversations in POW camps also revealed the diversity of Japanese military experiences and attitudes. Not all prisoners were fanatical supporters of the war or the Japanese government. This complexity emerged more readily in discussions with guards who could understand subtle expressions of doubt or criticism. Some prisoners had been drafted reluctantly. Others had grown disillusioned with military leadership. Still others had begun questioning the wisdom of Japan's strategic decisions. These nuanced perspectives might be lost in translation with non-Japanese interrogators. American intelligence officers learned that Japanese military morale was more fragile than propaganda suggested. Many soldiers harbored private doubts about the war's conduct and likely outcome. This information proved valuable for psychological warfare efforts and strategic planning. Guards' cultural knowledge also proved valuable in managing camp discipline and morale. Understanding concepts like face and honor allowed them to maintain order while respecting prisoners' dignity. This approach often proved more effective than purely punitive measures. Camp environments became more stable and productive when cultural sensitivity guided management decisions. Prisoners who felt their dignity was respected were more likely to cooperate with camp rules and routines. Guards who understood cultural motivations could address problems before they escalated into serious conflicts. Some of the most poignant exchanges occurred when prisoners learned about the internment of Japanese Americans. Many had been unaware that America had imprisoned its own citizens of Japanese ancestry. This knowledge created complex emotional responses. Some felt vindicated in their view of American racism. If America imprisoned its own Japanese citizens, then propaganda about American racial hatred was accurate. Others were troubled by the parallel between their own captivity and that of innocent Japanese American families. Corporal Kenji Nakayama was a guard whose entire family had been interned at Manzanar. He found these conversations particularly difficult to navigate. When prisoners learned about the camps where Japanese American families were held, reactions varied dramatically. Some expressed sympathy. Others seemed satisfied that we were suffering too, he recalled. It was a reminder that even shared heritage doesn't eliminate the divisions created by war. As the war progressed, and Japan's situation became increasingly desperate, the tone of conversations in POW camps began to change. Prisoners who had initially expected quick rescue or prisoner exchanges began confronting the possibility of prolonged captivity or even Japanese defeat. Japanese-speaking guards became crucial sources of information about the war's progress. They had to balance honesty with security requirements. Too much information could compromise operations. Too little could damage the trust that made intelligence gathering possible. News of American victories in the Pacific created complex emotions throughout the camp system. Guards felt pride in American military success. Prisoners experienced the pain of learning about their country's defeats. Both sides struggled with the human cost of ongoing conflict. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 created particularly intense emotional moments in the camps. Many prisoners had family in the targeted cities. Guards found themselves providing both information and emotional support to men processing unimaginable loss. Sergeant Robert Kuroda was on duty when news of the Hiroshima bombing reached his camp. The impact on prisoners was devastating, not just because of the destruction, but because of what it represented about the war's likely outcome. The prisoners were devastated, not just by the destruction, but by the realization that the war was truly lost, he remembered. Some asked me directly if I thought America would destroy all of Japan. I had to find ways to be honest about the situation, while still maintaining hope for their families. Japan's surrender announcement on August 15, 1945, created complex emotions throughout the POW camp system. For guards, it represented victory and the prospect of returning to their families. For prisoners, it meant the end of their military service and the beginning of an uncertain future in a defeated nation. The period between surrender and repatriation provided final opportunities for meaningful exchanges between guards and prisoners. Many prisoners expressed gratitude for the treatment they had received, particularly from Japanese-speaking guards who had helped them maintain dignity during captivity. Some guards found themselves genuinely concerned about prisoners' futures in post-war Japan. Would they be accepted back into Japanese society after surrendering? Would they face punishment for survival when death was expected? Would their families still be alive to welcome them home? These final conversations often focused on hopes for the future and possibilities for peaceful relations between Japan and America. Both guards and prisoners had been changed by their experiences. They had developed more nuanced understanding of their former enemies and greater appreciation for the complexity of international relations. The repatriation process itself was managed with cultural sensitivity that reflected lessons learned during the camp period. Japanese-speaking personnel helped facilitate smooth transitions. Cultural protocols were observed to maintain prisoner dignity during the handover process. Long-term impact of these encounters extended far beyond immediate participants. Japanese prisoners who returned home carried new perspectives on America and Americans, particularly regarding the diversity and complexity of American society. Their accounts of respectful treatment by Japanese-speaking guards contributed to more positive attitudes toward American occupation forces. Stories of cultural understanding and human decency helped counteract propaganda narratives about American hatred and racism. Japanese-American guards had demonstrated their loyalty and value to American military efforts in the most direct way possible. Their service helped pave the way for post-war recognition of Japanese-American contributions and eventual acknowledgement that internment had been a grave injustice. Intelligence gathered through conversations between Japanese-speaking guards and prisoners proved valuable not just for immediate military purposes, but for post-war planning and occupation policies. American officials gained insights into Japanese psychology, culture, and social structures that informed their approach to rebuilding Japan as a democratic ally. Perhaps most significantly, these encounters demonstrated the power of language and cultural understanding to bridge even the deepest divisions. In camps across America, young men who might have been mortal enemies on the battlefield found common ground through shared language and cultural heritage. The story of Japanese POWs encountering Japanese-speaking American guards reveals the complexity of identity, loyalty, and belonging in wartime. It challenges simple narratives about us versus them and demonstrates how individual relationships can transcend boundaries created by conflict. These encounters highlight the unique position of Japanese Americans during World War II. They served their country while their families were imprisoned. They proved their loyalty while facing discrimination. They used their cultural heritage as a weapon against the land of their ancestors. Their service as guards and interpreters represented both personal sacrifice and national contribution in ways that few could fully appreciate at the time. They bridged cultures while remaining loyal to America. They honored their heritage while serving their country. As the last POW camps closed and prisoners returned to Japan, relationships formed between guards and prisoners became memories that would influence both sides for decades to come. Japanese soldiers who had been shocked to encounter fluent Japanese speakers in American uniforms carried home stories that would help shape Japan's post-war relationship with America. Guards themselves had served their country in a unique and complex role. They had used their cultural heritage and language skills to support American victory, while maintaining their humanity and dignity in impossible circumstances. Their service demonstrated that loyalty to America could coexist with pride in Japanese heritage. They proved that cultural diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness. They showed that American identity could encompass multiple cultural traditions without losing its essential character. The legacy of these encounters continues to resonate today. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments of conflict, human connections can transcend boundaries of war, race, and nationality. Language can serve as a bridge when weapons create only destruction. Japanese POWs who couldn't believe American guards spoke fluent Japanese had discovered something profound about the nature of American society. They learned about the possibility of bridging differences that seem insurmountable. They experienced firsthand the complexity of identity in a diverse democracy. In the end, these conversations in POW camps represented more than just intelligence gathering or camp administration. They were moments of human connection that demonstrated the power of language, culture, and shared humanity to create understanding even in the midst of the world's most devastating conflict. The story challenges us to remember that wars are fought by human beings who carry within them the capacity for both destruction and connection. It reminds us that cultural understanding can coexist with military necessity. It demonstrates that respect for human dignity can survive even the most brutal conflicts. These encounters between Japanese prisoners and Japanese-speaking American guards represent one of World War II's most remarkable and little-known chapters. They reveal the complexity of American society and the strength that comes from diversity. They show how individual acts of humanity can transcend the boundaries created by global conflict. The legacy lives on in the relationships between Japan and America that emerged from the ashes of war. It continues in the recognition that cultural heritage and national loyalty are not mutually exclusive. It endures in the understanding that language and cultural sensitivity can be weapons of peace as powerful as any military force,